Hello, I'm Clare Bottle, Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association, and my presentation today is about growing our own warehouse talent. For those who don't know the UK Warehousing Association, we're a trade body representing about 800 members, and the majority of those are 3PL logistics companies who operate warehousing in the UK. I'm fairly new as Chief Executive, having joined the organisation in July 2021. And one of the things that's really important to me is to take a collaborative approach within our industry to skills in logistics, and especially logistics skills around warehousing. So you can see here from my agenda that there are a couple of topics we're going to go through. I'd like to talk about whether we're trying to tackle a labour shortage or a skills gap, and a bit about the difference between them. I'm going to move on to discuss the idea of widening our talent pool. Then I'm going to talk about some training options, and finally finish with a few conclusions. So, a labour shortage or a skills gap? Well, the graphs which you can see on this slide come from a Financial Times report earlier in 2021, and the red line which you can see on each of these graphs is the number of job adverts in the different sectors. And you can see that in catering and hospitality, we've started to see a recovery around April time of this year. That aligns with what we know about lockdown activity and the impact that had on catering and hospitality. But 100 is the index mark. So they're only really just back to around the index of where they were in February 2020. Construction and trades, you can see that that's well above the index, so there has been some growth in that sector. But when compared with transport, logistics and warehousing, there's a much more distinct and quite dramatic growth in the number of job adverts. And if we use that as a proxy for how many jobs are out there that are not currently fulfilled, it does demonstrate that there's definitely a labour shortage. About 2.5 million people work in logistics in the UK. We've certainly heard quite a lot in the media about the HGV driver shortage. And recently, I suppose, as a result of COVID-19, we've also learned that key worker status is now more recognised by members of the public, even perhaps by policymakers, than ever before. So for those of us who have worked in the industry, we always knew about the importance of logistics people, whether that's for our food supply chains, for pharmaceuticals, and for any other essential goods. But that is now more widely recognised. Yet still, we seem to have this labour shortage. And at the same time, I would argue we've also got a skills gap. And what I mean by that is that even for those who are already within our industry, there are opportunities to learn more, to do more, to add more value within the logistics and warehousing sector. And a couple of the issues that we certainly see gaps in will be around systems, around robotics, and the sustainability agenda. So in order to deliver the warehouses of the future, I think we need to tackle both of these problems together in a coherent way, thinking about labour shortages and also about skills gaps. So how are we going to do that? Well, partly, I think it will be about widening our talent pool. McKinsey's have produced a 2020 report entitled Diversity Wins. And if this argument needs making again, then I will feel a bit disappointed about that, but I'm going to make it anyway. Companies which have a more diverse workforce are more profitable. And there's plenty of evidence of that in a number of reports, including the one I've just mentioned. A further point that I'd like to add, which is also referenced in McKinsey's report, is that really an inclusive culture is a prerequisite to delivering on a strategy of diversity. And what that really means in lay speak is to say, if you just focus on diversity of your workforce, you could end up with a revolving door where people from a diverse range of backgrounds that reflect our communities may well join your business, but if they don't feel that they can be themselves, they may not be able to add as much value as they want, and those people will be more likely to leave. Whereas if you focus on an inclusive culture and think about inclusion first, then diversity follows more readily. So the big question that people ask themselves is, can we be ourselves at work? And that's something that leaders and managers need to consider when thinking about the questions of our labour shortage and our skills gaps, because it will be we'll be able to address that by widening the talent pool. And there are a couple of examples from within the UK Warehousing Association that we can point to. So you can see some logos across the bottom of the slide here. WorkFit is an organisation that the UKWA member XPO Logistics have been working alongside for a couple of years now, and that's helping people with disabilities to get into work in warehousing. In fact, just 5.9% of people who have a learning disability are in paid employment. But that trend is being bucked by WorkFit and their link with XPO Logistics. The next logo, which you can see, is from Tempus Novo. Again, they've been working with one of the UKWA members, and that's Clipper Logistics. So Tempus Novo work with prisoners and ex-offenders. Upon release, 64% of prisoners end up behind bars again within 2 years. But for those who join the Tempus Novo programme, that's less than 2%. So what a huge difference, from 64% reoffending down to less than 2% reoffending when they embark on these programs with Tempus Novo, who help ex-offenders to get work. And warehousing has proved to be a very fruitful employment sector for Tempus Novo to work with. And then finally, I just want to mention Women in Logistics UK. In fact, something like 4% of RTITB licence holders are women, and yet companies like Coca-Cola European Partners are working with Cranfield University to research how we can get more women to work in warehousing and to have successful careers. So in order to widen the talent pool, we'll need to think about recruiting from unfamiliar or atypical places, including people who have disabilities, ex-offenders, women. All of those may be areas of recruitment that wouldn't immediately come to mind, but where there is proven evidence that they can be successful. And where else can we source new talent? Well, perhaps a really obvious place to look would be schools and colleges. There are something like 3.5 million students at secondary school, and that number is going up. I think a couple of years ago it was only 3.2 million. In our workforce, about 2.5 million people work in logistics. Maybe a fifth of them are working in warehousing. So people working in logistics represent something like 7 or 8% of our workforce. If we apply that percentage to the 3.5 million students who are at secondary school, we can deduce that about 250,000 of the students currently in secondary school are likely to end up working in logistics. So how are they going to find out about us? Because I do think there's a risk here that children at school don't hear about logistics. There's no GCSE in transport or warehousing. There's no A-level. There's not even a BTEC. And in fact, BTECs are being defunded as we speak, which perhaps demonstrates that policymakers are not very committed to vocational training. When it comes to looking at university courses, there are 17 UK universities which offer courses in logistics. So that may be one way that students at school will come across our sector, but it doesn't compare very well with some of the more widely recognised professions. There are 103 institutions that offer courses in medicine and 119 for law. So just 17 for logistics does tend to indicate that we're a lower profile when it comes to children at school and the careers advisors who support them. Careers advice has been revamped in the last couple of years due to some changes in policy, and this comes under the headline of the Gatsby benchmarks, 8 benchmarks which are illustrated on the slide that you can see, and in particular around benchmark 5 and benchmark 6. There are real opportunities here for employers in logistics to make sure that children in local schools know about the career opportunities that you might have to offer. So schools are obliged to make sure that their students have encounters with employers and employees, and that they have experiences of workplaces. These have both been quite difficult for schools to deliver during the pandemic, but as things start to get somewhat back to normal, there are lots of opportunities for employers to really tap into the Gatsby benchmarks. And for those who would like some support to do so, I would definitely recommend Think Logistics, who have a lot of online materials which are useful, and also some in-classroom programs which employers can get involved with to help schools to deliver the benchmarks and to help employers to raise their profile and the profile of our industry in general. So let's go on to talk about how we can support people. And remember, it's not just new entrants from non-typical recruitment initiatives or people coming straight from school who need training and support in the workplace. Based on what I said before about inclusivity, existing employees also need that kind of investment. An inclusive culture is a prerequisite for making a diversity strategy effective. The first area that I'm going to talk about is apprenticeships, and the apprenticeship levy is tried and tested and has been in place since April 2017. So for big employers, those who spend £3 million a year or more on their employment costs, they have to pay 0.5% of the wages bill into a separate fund called the apprenticeship levy. And if that money is still there 2 years later, in effect, it becomes like a tax and is attributed to the Treasury. But in the interim period, during that 2 years, companies can tap into that levy fund and use it to fund training for new and existing employees. So what are the pros and cons of apprenticeships? Well, there are some really good frameworks. I think there's been a bit more of a challenge in other areas of logistics, but particularly in warehousing, there are some good, strong frameworks with a range of different levels. So trainers like Remit Training, I've worked with delivering level 2 apprenticeships in warehousing, which is getting 18-year-olds to learn how to drive a forklift truck. And similarly, I've also worked with Aston University on apprenticeships at level 6, which is a degree apprenticeship, getting people who want to study at university to tap into that levy funding in order to get some on-the-job experience alongside a very robust academic programme. Because of the way that the funding works, it can be very attractive to large employers to use apprenticeship levy funding because it's a use it or lose it model, which means that if you haven't spent the money, it will ultimately go to the Treasury. And so that's, again, another reason why big companies in particular tend to be very keen to look at apprenticeships as a training model. In terms of the cons, because I've talked a bit about the pros here, there are a few poor service providers. And what I would certainly recommend is using Ofsted. So Ofsted may be well known to you as an organisation that monitors schools, but they do the same for apprenticeship training providers and can be a useful source of information about who are the good training providers and maybe who are not so good. There are some aspects of apprenticeships which can be a little inflexible. So you can see in one of my bullet points on the slide, apprenticeships have to last for at least a year. So apprenticeship levy funding can't be used for very short courses. And apprentices are expected to spend at least 20% of their time on off-the-job training. The definition for that is sometimes a little ambiguous. And it can be defined fairly flexibly so that, for example, if somebody attends a meeting that they wouldn't have normally gone to, or if they shadow a different job, which is not what they would sort of be doing in their normal day-to-day job description, then that can all be classed as part of the off-the-job training. But for some employers, especially smaller businesses, they can find it's a bit of a challenge to be able to allow somebody to spend 20% of their time learning and only be working on their day job 80% of the time. The levy funds training costs, but it doesn't fund salary costs. So to take on any new apprentices, organisations will need to be able to pay for the salary costs of those individuals, but the training can be funded through the levy. And for SMEs, especially those smaller businesses that are not actually paying into the levy in the first place, they may find it a little harder to navigate. But organisations such as the UK Warehousing Association are here to help, and there is support available to be able to make the most of apprenticeships as an opportunity for training. But apprenticeships are not the only option. So let me come on to talk a little more about another programme known as Kickstart. So the Kickstart scheme was introduced in 2020, and during the first 10 months or so, something like 44,000 roles have been created. These roles are aimed at 16 to 24-year-olds who are on universal credit to get those people into work. So in terms of the pros of the Kickstart scheme, it funds the minimum wage and national insurance contributions and pension contributions for people who fit the right category. And that funding covers 25 hours a week for a 6-month period. So in other words, it's a very well-funded model for getting young people into work. There are some real success stories, and I think some of the employers who very successfully embarked on Kickstart programs include TalkTalk and Matalan, and it's really aimed at tackling youth unemployment. But moving on now to talk a little about the cons or the downside of the Kickstart scheme. To be fair, it's not been widely used in logistics. So some of those success stories that I mentioned tend to be more around admin and retail type roles. And although, as I said, there have been 44,000 roles created in the first 10 months of the programme, that still falls well short of what was originally promised. When the government announced the Kickstart scheme, it was said that there would be 250,000 jobs for young people. Time is running out because these jobs are supposed to start by December 2021, although of course the funding is for 6 months, so it may last into 2022, depending on the start date. But it now seems unlikely that this scheme will have the breadth that was originally envisaged, or indeed deliver the number of jobs that were promised at the start. And of course, it's not for existing employees. So Kickstart is really about people who are on universal credit, who are not working, getting those people into work. So there are some limitations, but again, in certain circumstances, that may be a really useful program. Next, I'm going to come on to talk about the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. The National Skills Fund has been launched with £2.5 billion worth of funding, and a proportion of that is dedicated to the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. This is to make sure that anybody in the UK who does not currently have any level 3 qualification, that's the equivalent of an A-level qualification, can obtain government funding in order to get a level 3 qualification. So in terms of the pros, it's really focused on adult learners and can be used for existing and new staff. So it's quite flexible in that sense. So anybody who doesn't currently have a level 3 qualification is likely to be eligible. In terms of cons, this scheme was launched in September 2020, a year ago, but the take-up has been quite limited. It only applies to a particular range of jobs and skills which are thought to be in short supply. And to be fair, logistics features, and even specifically a warehousing and storage diploma, is listed on the government website as one of the level 3 qualifications which is eligible for the Lifetime Skills Guarantee funding. However, UKWA's initial research to try and promote this has found that there are very few, if any, training providers who are actually delivering this and tapping into the Lifetime Skills Guarantee for the particular qualification mentioned on the slide, the warehousing and storage diploma. So capacity for delivering that training is fairly limited. And the one college which we have briefly spoken to about delivery is Leeds City College, who say that despite them being able to offer it and having capacity, the take-up is quite poor. They're talking about changing to a different delivery model because they're finding that there are limitations on interest from local employers. One of the barriers may be that anybody who's currently on universal credit will no longer be eligible for their universal credit while they're accessing the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. So this may be one of the barriers to entry. And similarly, the assessment method for achieving the qualification is something that the college are looking at quite closely to make sure that people are not being put off by the idea of perhaps having to be tested or sit exams. It can be done by 100% assessment on the job, and it's thought that that will be a move that will help to increase take up. But even so, there seem to be very few training providers that can actually deliver it. And of course, the lifetime skills guarantee, whilst it's excellent for those who are underqualified and don't currently have anything at level 3, you won't be eligible if you've got any kind of qualification at level 3, no matter whether that's out of date or irrelevant to your current role. If you've got a level 3 qualification, such as an A level, then you wouldn't be eligible as a candidate for this particular funding. So to summarise that, there are several different models of government funding which are available and which could be used within logistics and within warehousing to help us grow our own talent, to help us nurture existing employees and take on more new employees, perhaps from some atypical areas of the talent pool. And what's the point of all this? Well, there are several reasons why training is important, but let me first say that I think there is some pent-up demand within our sector. Something like 1.92 million of the UK's workforce are currently still on furlough. And these are people where they may well be coming back onto the jobs market. The furlough scheme is scheduled to finish around the end of September. So at its height, that was a scheme in May 2020, which was funding about 9 million jobs. There is still something like 2 million jobs being funded through the furlough scheme. And as that scheme ends, there's a risk that some of those people who have been on furlough may not be able to return to their original jobs and may come onto the jobs market. So that will create some requirements for training, and potentially if those people are looking to come into the logistics sector, where we've seen there are lots of opportunities and unfulfilled job vacancies, then training may be relevant there. But equally, for employers who have got people who have either been working from home or been operating within a COVID-safe workplace, training has taken a back seat during the pandemic. So typically speaking, in 2017, if you were to ask an adult in the UK workforce, have you had any training in the last 3 months? About a quarter of them would say yes. So about a quarter of all our workforce in the UK would normally have had some training quite recently. I don't have an equivalent figure because the same data isn't immediately available, but it is well recognised that those numbers are well down now. As I say, that's partly because of the impact of the working from home, and partly because of the operation of COVID-safe workplaces, which has had an effect on companies investing in training. Now, even the mainstream media, even the Guardian newspaper was reporting, I think on the 12th of August, statistics from Knight Frank saying that 37 million square feet of warehousing is due to be built in 2021. Our own UKWA report by Savills has shown that growth in warehousing was already really strong prior to that pandemic. And if anything, it's got stronger. We're seeing a lot of investment in infrastructure, in the physical building of warehouse buildings. What we need to make sure is that we also reflect that with investment in skills to tackle the labour shortages and the skills gaps by investing in training and developing our people. Training is a great tool for recruitment and also for retention. And as you can see on my slide, some of the benefits of training people include giving them the skills to be good at their job, making them competent and productive in the role that they do, giving them self-esteem and confidence so that people will go the extra mile, so that they will deliver over and above what they were previously able to do and will feel confident in doing that. Giving people opportunity for career development and to maintain or improve their professional status. And as I mentioned at the beginning, everybody in the UK now has a better understanding of the fact that warehouse workers are in fact key workers and the critical role that warehousing plays in the economy of the UK. And finally, when people feel that they've been invested in, that does form part of the inclusive culture that I've mentioned. It can help to engender a sense of ownership of your job role and loyalty to your business and to your colleagues. So there are really a lot of positives to be had from investing in training alongside an investment in infrastructure. And the situation that we're in at the moment in our industry shows that there's lots of growth, lots of opportunity. And one of the ways that we ought to capitalise on that is by recruiting more people, training them, and also investing in the people that we already have working in the warehouse workforces of the UK. So that's everything that I wanted to say today. For those who would like to make contact and follow up, this is an online session with IMHX Connect, but you're very welcome to reach out to me via social media or through the UK Warehousing Association. Thank you very much for listening. That's it from me.